Hello and welcome. Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. How is everyone doing?
Good. Хорошо.
Отлично. Спасибо. Donna, is it correct?
I know maybe 5 words in Russian. That's it.
That's terrific. I won't be speaking Russian, though.
I saw that. I thought, okay, good.
All right. Well, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I think I will start in just 1 minute. I hope that everybody is connecting and has a good day. Where is everyone from?
I'm from the south of Tacoma in Spanaway, Washington.
Terrific.
I'm in Seattle.
Wonderful. Keeping it pretty local.
Hi, Zoe.
Hi, sorry, I'm driving, so that's why I don't turn on my video. It's too distracting, but I'm listening.
Wonderful. Well, I hope that you at least can hear me well. All right. Hello, Michelle. How are you doing? Hello, Michelle. All right. I think we're ready to start. We have a wonderful group of 5 people, and I think that will probably be conducive to some conversations in the session. I want to make it a little more conversational, partially because these are pretty kind of fresh ideas that are in some ways may sound half-baked. And secondly, because that's probably one of my first more serious experiences presenting. So I hope for some grace from you as the audience. But I will start my presentation. I apologize, I'm just looking at my screen behind. So it might be, I'm still looking at everyone and I can see you all there. All right. I just want to make sure that I don't miss any people coming in here. All right, so the topic of this presentation or discussion has to do with teaching heritage learners and the curriculum, and how as part of the curriculum design and our practices, we want to mend the cultural divide. So the goals for my session will be to, just discuss and maybe present several curricular social justice trends that can apply to the language classroom. Then I would also like to propose one of the goals for this curriculum, which sounds as mending a cultural divide. And then I would like to invite you to reflect on pedagogical practices and learner experiences that you create in the language classroom. First of all, in the chat, I want to ask for your introductions. So what is your preferred name? What are your pronouns? What is your cultural and linguistic background? And finally, what is your professional role? So I'll give you some time to do that while I'm still figuring out some issues with my computer. And then I give you some, overview of who I am, right, to talk about this. But first of all, I'd like to hear, who are you? Who are the people in the room? I know that it's probably a little bit of a reverse, order. So in the chat, is the chat function, all right, working? And can you see the presentation too? Terrific, thank you. Thank you, Bob, thank you, Donna. Right, wonderful. I hope that will also give you some opportunity to, learn about each other and see if there are any points of connection, because that's, I guess, what I always seek for in any audience and, in any classroom. But I think it is even more valuable for our heritage learners who might not be, feeling the same about the culture we're teaching, in particular because as educators, many educators I met come from a different cultural background and are immigrants here in the US, which is not always the case. But I feel this is the space where it is very interesting to seek this connection, but at the same time, it's also very hard for us as educators to always understand, how our heritage speakers feel. On the other hand, there are some aspects of, this kind of attitude to culture, which is different for people who are raised, for example, in America and are exploring the different culture, from this distance in America. I will move to the next slide, but if anyone else would like to add to this conversation and introductions, please feel free to. So here's something about me, right? And I've been a public school teacher for the last 5 years. I was a substitute teacher, so that was my introduction to the American education system, as I got my degree in Russia and moved here already as an English teacher, and pursued my career here. So continue that, but I had to learn a lot about the American experience, and I think that trying to connect the American, again, public school and education experiences with heritage learner teaching, not only through that, but also the immigrant lens. I do some activism. I work with LGBTQ individuals, talk about immigrant rights, anti-capitalism in a way that, seeing the world in a more connected way and how it can be disconnected, right, through the concept of money, and seek inclusive environments. So more recent, a strand for me is kind of philosophical thinking in terms of philosophy of education. So here I will present the questions that I asked you at the beginning of this presentation, but through a concept of culture, right, through this cultural lens. So here are some questions for you to reflect, and also, if I probably should have done the poll, because these are yes/no questions. But if you would like to, please reflect in the chat with me. So one of the questions I asked you right at the beginning was your pronouns. And that's like a new practice that I observe in American schools. And I question, right, why is this practice coming up here? And why is it something we are still not doing in many heritage language classrooms? right? I definitely can say that maybe Seattle schools or our Washington schools are different from the rest of the country too. So this is where we can, you know, also talk about different cultures within, you know, our country. But is there a value in asking this question, right? A value for our students who are trying to explore their identities and try to find belonging in different cultures. So how, you know, how does this question matter for a heritage language or just a language classroom? Next question I would like to ask you is, do you encourage your students to use their birth names? Right, so, and how do you ask them to pronounce those names, right? Is there maybe a student preferred nickname that you are using? So we can see how even with the introduction on the first day of a class, you know, we already tap into the cultural differences that exist, right, between where we are teaching and the culture we are trying to teach, right? So the reasons for why I'm bringing these questions is that, you know, we would like to make sure that our students feel comfortable in the language classroom, but also that they start feeling comfortable when they, you know, somehow join different cultural spaces of their, you know, heritage culture. I'm bringing up these questions also because that in the Russian cultural space, and I teach Russian in the summer Star Talk program, these are the questions which are not usually asked, or the questions where, you know, the teacher often makes an assumption, right? If they are, again, in a different setting, like teaching in Russia, for instance. Right. There's also a question to the teacher, which is an interesting one, you know, and which also applies to the American culture. The fact that we use probably different names in different spaces. Do you use the same name, you know, in different spaces? Let me explain this and give an example, what I mean, right? So my first name is Alexei, but if I were to teach in a Russian classroom in Russia, I would probably introduce myself with my first name and patronymic, which will sound Alexei Alexandrovich. So this is something, this is the practice we encourage when we're teaching our heritage learners here in, you know, at University of Washington Startup program. But this is not the practice, you know, our students are used to. And the question is, again, how do we make sure they are comfortable of using, you know, their patronymic when they go back or they go to their heritage country, right? Like Russia in this example, which might be something they embrace. At the same time, you know, there's also a question of this, again, divide. Do we allow for a different expression? Do we insist on, you know, our students using like the first name and patronymic for the benefit of the students, or does it actually create some kind of divide when we are here in the US in, you know, the American culture? Another thing is, you know, here in the US, as I said, that also doesn't quite apply, right? That we use the same name in all spaces. We do say, you know, please say Mr. or Miss or Doctor when we are talking with our students in educational spaces, plus the last name, right? So again, here's the question when I ask, does it create some cultural divide between the people of different generations? And there was an interesting example. I had an experience in a Bellevue big picture school where actually the students use the first name when they talk to the teachers. And you can definitely see how the cultural space changes. But let's return to our heritage speakers and how we definitely create a culture in the classroom, right? So I already asked this question: how would a teacher in the classroom in a different region of the country or in the language majority country approach these questions? And the fact that they don't approach these questions at all, right, can push our heritage learners a little bit away from exploring that culture, right? So that's where I say, bringing up those questions in here and actually analyzing how we approach, again, the issue with names and pronouns in a language classroom might encourage our students to be more favorable of their, heritage culture and heritage language, right? With my bigger goal, which I will introduce just in a moment, which is bring that to their, language majority culture, their heritage culture, and maybe actually affect some change there. And then finally, what is our role as educators, right, in asking these questions in the classroom and bringing those questions to the classroom? Are we, trying to just teach some culture in our understanding, right, as we see, for example, a traditional culture, the one we're teaching, or are we able to change something actually in the culture we teach about for the benefit, again, of the students and for their own comfort? I guess my approach to this is informed through the social justice lens, which is becoming more and more prominent in American educational spaces. So the first question I'll have, and maybe I will hear some of your voices. So how do you understand like just social justice? What is the social justice curriculum, right? Somebody would like to, unmute themselves.
Do you want us to talk or to chat, or?
Yeah, it's just if you turn on your microphone, right, and maybe help you with the definition.
To me, the key thing is that social justice in the classroom cannot be just about learning about something that's outside the classroom. It has to be something that is brought into the classroom in some ways, influences how the classroom is operated. Otherwise, to me, it's just not authentic to operate the classroom very traditionally and say that you're learning about social justice is not experiential if it's just reading about it in a book, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, I agree with you, Michelle. Thank you.
I've read about, like, in reading definitions of like culturally responsive teaching versus social justice teaching. And there's like major overlap between all these things. And there's a third that I'm forgetting right now, but like social justice education, to my understanding, is like focusing on systemic barriers to just like access to anything that would, people typically want in society, like all kinds of different resources, be it quality education, breaking like cycles of, sorry, my baby's talking here, cycles of generational cycles of poverty, like issues of racism, sexism, et cetera, et cetera. And so not to be confused necessarily with some of these other like things, but that's my understanding. It's like focusing on systemic barriers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Brendan. Absolutely, yes. And if you, I guess, look at all the recent trends, here I just listed some of them, the ones I could, quickly think of. But you can probably supply me with a longer list. So please feel free in the chat to add to this list. So there's social emotional learning curriculum, which is definitely addressing a lot of social justice issues in a way that it brings some awareness to who we are and who other people are, right? From this kind of even perspective of feelings and connections to the world, right? How we see the world. Decolonizing the curriculum, one of the trends, and I really apologize if there's too much lingo in what I'm saying. Please feel free to ask and clarify something you feel is a little bit tricky and challenging. Critical race theory, right, has been pretty much in the news in the last couple months. For some reason, it became a very contentious issue. But again, as Brendan said, there are lots of aspects of systemic injustice that this curriculum is trying to address, as well as the decolonizing aspect of the curriculum, just to add here, right, the kind of recent understanding and discussion of curriculum, right, of colonization just in general, is that this curriculum probably shows a very Eurocentric, white male view of the world, maybe stemming from this vision that, the winner writes history. So that brings me to the last point, right? This Western centrism or Eurocentrism in curriculum, which is being addressed in different ways. Is there something from this list that you use in your classroom already? Do you include any of these practices or any of those trends in your teaching? I'm curious.
I'll add something. One thing, I retired from the classroom. I just work with student teachers now, but one thing that I used to always try and do was to bring in like multiple perspectives and lenses. And with, at least at the schools we have such a diverse population. And so from each perspective and all, and bringing it all in and bringing it together and taking a real hard look at the history. And I'd even compare it to, when I was in high school back in the 60s and 70s, we learned who was the general for each war from America. And that was about it, and I'm just like, the world is so much bigger and there are so many different perspectives. And I know my globalization class in college, in grad school actually, was kind of a really big eye opener that really got me reading more and so encouraging the students to get that global perspective and that sense of equity and empathy for, okay, here's the story we told. Let's go to the other side and let's look at it with heart. And that seemed to really help bring an enlightenment to the class.
Thank you, Donna. Do you work with heritage learners too?
I used to do Spanish heritage and AP Spanish heritage in Everett, but I'm retired now.
So I wonder how all these aspects, right, can be applied to a heritage language classroom, because I think for me, as a public school teacher, right, these things do exist in a heritage, in a public school, right? The conversations about that are happening, but unfortunately with many heritage languages, I feel like, first of all, the teachers do not have the access to the same professional development as, like public school teachers, in particular, maybe in community schools or community settings. And secondly, I feel that maybe even attitude towards the social justice curriculum, just in general, very different in immigrant communities, right? As how I feel. So I feel that many of my colleagues are not very enthusiastic about including that, not necessarily because they themselves don't feel that is right, but maybe they don't feel that the students are ready for that, or their parents are ready to you know, to allow their students discuss these questions in the different, you know, language learning spaces. I don't know if anyone has any comments about that. Maybe you have a very different experience of you know, working with heritage educators.
Are you referring to heritage educators who are working in like the mainstream public school setting or in their own like community schools? It's pretty different. I have a fair amount of experience from years of working with the Confucius Institute, of working with a lot of the community-based schools. And, you know, I can't say, I mean, I can't an expert on what they were teaching or how they were approaching it, but it definitely did not strike me that they were trying to get to these kinds of topics that were kind of central to many educators and students' agendas in the public school setting.
Thank you. Well, I feel that kind of, you know, supplies my argument in a way that that's also, right, my feel that not every language educator is striving to include that. The question I always have, right, in the end is, does it benefit our learners? And does it benefit, you know, the learning of this different heritage culture? Well, let me share a little bit about my immigrant experience. I'll try to catch up with the chat. I'm, as the only presenter, I'll try to, you know, spend some time reading that after, of course, and give you some space for questions, but let me just catch up. All right. And I would like to read Donna's comment. Right, she says that students seem very ready to discuss tough topics in a safe classroom environment. And there's a lot of research, especially in the last you know, years, about the classroom spaces, and in particular, you know, in African American rights advocacy, that played a very important part, right? So that was the classroom. These were the classroom spaces and educators who were able to, you know, give the students some kind of legitimacy, their voices, and give them chance to discuss those difficult issues, just because these were the you know, safe or background classroom spaces, right? So they didn't have to do that really publicly. And I believe that this is the same thing which can apply to our heritage classrooms, right? So this is also the space, and in particular here in the US, I feel like that's an important space, as we are, you know, questioning our own culture, but we don't let the students, you know, engage with another culture in a more critical way. And let me go back to the immigrant experience I had, right? Why I feel that there is this kind of cultural divide, and this is something I am actually trying to mend or bridge. Like after moving here, I did hear a lot about, you know, how the US is, you know, such a wonderful place, right? And how it is much better here than where I'm coming from. So that was a comment from my in-laws. And, you know, not only, in all honesty. And I feel that for many immigrant families, that also becomes kind of a motto that, you know, for one reason or the other, they maybe because of the fact, as you know, individuals, we do want to be proud of our choices and you know, the spaces we now occupying, again, by our choice, is that we do kind of put this culture like as an exemplar culture, right, compared to the culture like we left. And Another thing that I heard from many people, especially when I, tell them that I grew up gay in Russia, that it must be really bad there. And people have a lot of, bias against the whole culture, just based on this kind of vision of, gay rights, which are so much in the news. Which, is true to a degree. And this is, probably one of the reasons that I'm bringing up these topics here, right, in this space. But I feel like both those statements are preventing, us as educators to, first of all, let the students connect with that heritage culture in a more authentic way, so that the students can feel also proud of that second culture, because again, these statements are not very critically analyzed, right, by individuals, and we as educators don't analyze them in the classroom. So I guess that was the one thing I wanted to say about these statements. As I said, the mending of the cultural divide. Sorry, I'm trying to find where I wrote that, but I should include it on the slide. Mending the cultural divide idea, right, of when we are working with heritage learners should also follow the same social justice curriculum design elements. And I feel, and I propose that it does, because if we are trying to establish those connections between cultures in a way which is authentic to the students, they also develop this kind of feeling of self-love and knowledge, not only of one part of who they are, but also of both cultures. Because I do tell the people who say that, oh, it must be really bad in Russia in terms of gay rights, that there are lots of people who are actually fighting, advocating for that issue. There are lots of people who are talking about pronouns we should include, and there are some, efforts even among journalists who are not all, owned by the state media or anything like that. Again, another bias I deal with. That there is an effort to educate the society about, how we present LGBTQ issues in media spaces, because it is something that maybe back there the people are still learning, and this kind of cultural trend in America is actually catching up there. But I guess people here forget that in some ways LGBTQ rights and their progress is here is explained by a different culture, but it doesn't make the culture we're teaching about less I would say less superior, more inferior, right? So it's not about superiority, but it's just about a different kind of pace of development. I also, I can claim that mending the cultural divide advocates for respect for others, because if as individuals here, our learners can feel that, there are other people in that heritage culture that are fighting for the same issues as, are important to them, they will feel more respect for the culture just in general. And again, as a teacher in the classroom, we are the ones who create to this, sense of respect towards, the culture and, those individuals who bear the culture in the heritage country. It does talk about the issues of social justice, of course, or injustice. We talked already about the decolonization and the Euro or Western centrism, at least as it applies to teaching Russian. But again, there are lots of people who don't feel that much included when they are learning about, when they're learning a different language, because when they go back to the country, they get discriminated against, and they don't, as they don't speak the language as fluently. And I feel that that is an aspect that many of our learners, heritage learners experience. That's at least what I heard from, my colleagues who teach Arabic and who teach Spanish, that they don't, that their students don't feel the sense of belonging. And I do feel that, if we encourage our students to participate in the culture a little bit more, they will feel more confident also about, their language skills, because they will feel, again, a sense of belonging. Or even if they don't feel the confidence, at least they will be willing to express themselves in the language. So the social movements, and I feel that I just put it into different lines. Sorry, number 4 is a little bit cut off. But I encourage you to look at the document itself, because it does give just better examples of what social justice curriculum looks like in a public school setting, at least. The other 2 aspects, awareness raising and social action, again, we are trying to build this kind of awareness of different issues that are happening in a heritage culture, or in the country, right, where the language is the majority. And part of number 6, which I wanted to kind of like zoom in on, is that social action can also come from our students, because let me just do that, skip that. So the big goal, right, for our students will be to live in this interconnected and just world. And they are among those people who probably should take that social action at some point, by, feeling empowered, not only in this culture where they are growing up, right, but also like in the heritage culture that they are exploring. So that will help. How can we help them, right? I guess that's my last question to explore, is that we're trying to remove barriers to this cultural production and authentic self-expression. So one of the examples I gave at the beginning is, exploring the issue of pronouns, exploring the other issues which are happening in that heritage culture, and which are maybe a little bit contested and ambiguous. But again, if there are educators in this space in the US who are bringing these topics to the classroom that are a little controversial, but they have to do with our students' individuality and success, why don't we as heritage language educators not doing that more often and focus too much on just the traditional culture? And another thing for us as heritage educators to do is to consider elements of teaching, right, that will encourage heritage learners to pursue the self-expression and cultural production. The example I wanted to give, and here I will have to move a little bit forward, is teaching about Cold War in some aspect to my learners in this TAR Talk summer program. I feel like this is one of the topics which is still avoided a lot in the Russian language classroom. And it does reflect that as a society, we are still fighting with a trauma of this kind of Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union. So just in the early 90s, for the background, the Soviet Union, the country, many of our students' parents were born in, it fell apart, right? And many people immigrated to the US. After that, there were people, of course, who lived here before that. But the living here or moving here was probably connected with this notion of it's better here for many of our students. And that is something that is actually, I, as a person growing up in Russia, was also told that, that my country wasn't good enough. That's why, it kind of lost the war, the Cold War, and we should probably move on and look at the US and look at the things that, this country, the US is doing better, right? Use it as the ideal. But for many of the students, that's a very interesting topics, and this is something they don't usually discuss with their parents. This is something that they really have to research on their own. And just being able to talk about that in the classroom and being able to have access to more professionally written resources, having, an adult who is more or less aware of the topic, it let them, be more authentically connected with that culture and analyze it through a more critical lens, who they are, right? Why they're here, why their parents are here, and, is the story, is that clear cut as it gets often presented here in the US, or, based on their socialization, right? They also don't know a lot of the details of the story, and mostly have stereotypes and bias towards that topic. But in the end, these are the examples of the projects the students did. The focus was actually not the Cold War, but science fiction. So we analyzed how people in the Soviet Union and in Russia see or saw the future, right? What kind of world they were trying to build. And it was a very eye-opening project for me, because the students really, critical, not only about the US, but they're also critical about, the Soviet Union, and then some of the ideas over there, in a way that, I guess they processed it differently. They saw a lot of, strivings and of the people who were in the Soviet Union to creating this future, right? How they were trying to do to arrange their world so that they could get somewhat in their mindset, but they also were able to understand, the way people now see the culture in Russia and what kind of, hopes and dreams people have there. It also allowed them to, see the culture they live in right now in America through this lens of their heritage culture. So that was an absolutely, fascinating project, and the students really enjoyed working on that. I feel like we are almost out of time. It's 4:44. I wanted to see if anyone has questions. I'm ready to stay for another 5 minutes, but again, respecting your time. I appreciate your coming, and please feel free to write me an email to continue the conversation. As I said, it's just the beginning of my cultural exploration / educational philosophical project. At this point, again, feel free to ask questions and comment, or I'll be reading your chat and commenting.
Alexei, I love that you were thinking about and addressing all of these things, because I think that to me is one of the biggest challenges for young heritage people that were, especially if they were born here or came here when they were quite young, is that there's this void, like they don't actually really know what their parents are thinking about, what brought them here, what they left behind, how they feel about those things, and especially, the kinds of things that are a little bit tumultuous, like gender things and so on. And the history, as you say, it's really important to go back and have those conversations, I think. But what you're modeling as a teacher, which I think is also something that adults who are teachers can really do, is show that ambiguity, the uncertainty, the exploration, the willingness to take on something that doesn't feel quite comfortable. I think it's extremely powerful to do that. And I think especially for our heritage learners. And so anyway, just thank you. Thank you for sharing this. And this was a great contribution.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Donna. Just for full disclosure, we do work with Michelle. I've known Michelle for a long while. So she observed, the class and the conference itself where the students presented their project in Russian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for everybody for coming.
Thank you. Really appreciate your comments.